Our discussion today focuses on, well, what is probably the single greatest hurdle in any sustained effort, whether it's learning a language, mastering a new skill, or even advancing a career. And that is the inevitable, predictable collapse of our initial motivation. The source material we're looking at today really challenges a deeply ingrained cultural assumption, which is that motivation has to come before action.
Exactly. The material reframes this entirely. It asserts that the only sustainable path to progress is actually the reverse. You start with action, which leads to a small success, and, that is what then generates motivation. Now, I agree with that reframing. I do. But this brings us right to our central question. What factor is the primary, the indispensable fuel for getting us across that intermediate plateau and sustaining effort long-term? Is it the reliable structural system of habits and discipline, what we could call the how? Or is it the powerful, enduring, emotional foundation of one's core purpose, the why?
And I'm going to hold that the long-term effort really necessitates prioritizing that structural how. We have to focus on building automated systems and discipline because motivation, when you look at it scientifically, is just a chemical reward. And because of that, it's fundamentally unreliable for governing, complex multi-year projects.
And I'll maintain that the foundation of a deep purpose, the why, is the ultimate source of our resilience. I mean, systems are critical for day-to-day execution, yes, but they are entirely inert or frankly very easily abandoned without that strong internal conviction that provides direction and crucially prevents absolute failure during moments of profound emotional exhaustion.
The logic for prioritizing systems, it stems directly from human psychology, which the material dissects so well. I mean, that initial intense feeling of motivation, it's explicitly called out as just a potent cocktail of novelty and dopamine. And the material warns us very clearly that this cocktail is, quote, not built to last. So relying on it is just dangerous because we inevitably encounter two major psychological pitfalls. First, there's the hedonic treadmill. This is where what was once novel and exciting, let's say learning a few new words, it just becomes routine. The dopamine hit diminishes and the excitement fades. And second, we inevitably crash right into the valley of disappointment. This is where our high expectations, from that rapid initial progress, meet the slow, grinding reality of a logarithmic growth curve. Progress slows way down and we just feel stuck. So the solution to these predictable psychological drops, it can't be emotional, it has to be structural. We have to build what the material calls a slow-burning, reliable furnace of discipline that replaces that unreliable motivational spark. By embedding the sequence action, success, motivation, we essentially engineer progress by protecting our finite willpower. We stop asking our internal mood to drive the process and instead make progress automatic through habit engineering.
I see the power of that argument. I really do. It's undeniable that engineering the process makes daily execution easier, but I think we have to question the sustainability of a system that functions primarily to sort of circumvent the necessity of purpose. While engineering systems is necessary for daily execution, for preventing that daily draining decision of whether to act, the systems themselves are a product of a prior foundational choice, and that choice is driven by deep purpose. We can't discuss the sustainability of the system without discussing the commitment to the destination. Even the material, which is so focused on action, it acknowledges that the mechanical how has its limits. It dedicates an entire section to strategic reignition, noting that sometimes a learner needs a deliberate motivational boost. And what does that involve? It involves going back to reconnect with your why. A strong why is the engine that chooses and powers any how. Without a compelling purpose, whether that's getting a better job or connecting with a culture, the small, automated success of listening to 15 minutes of a podcast feels utterly hollow when the long-term outcome is still so distant. The why is the compass. The systems are just the map. And a map is useless if the compass doesn't define the commitment to the direction.
I think we're framing the reliability of human effort in two very distinct ways here. You're focusing on the internal combustion engine of purpose, while I'm focusing on the structural chassis that survives the inevitable storms. Systems are designed precisely to counteract the core features of human psychology that cause us to abandon things. We're explicitly told that relying on willpower alone is like trying to eat a house with a box of matches. It's brief, it's intense, but it's completely unsustainable. The brilliance of the system is its independence from that transient internal emotional state. I mean, take the empirical data points around the power of microhabits, specifically the 2-minute rule. This structural mechanism allows a learner to overcome that initial resistance by making the start laughably small. The goal is just the habit of showing up. It's the process, not the outcome. Look at Fatima, the doctor, who used this. She maintained an unbroken chain of days with just 15 minutes of structured study. Her small actions consistently stretched into longer sessions because the system created momentum. And then there's the case of Lars, the engineer. He shows the power of engineering your environment, making the right action the easiest action. That removed friction, it preserved his willpower, and it led to automatic progress. These are structural solutions to emotional problems. They literally bypass the need for motivation to even start.
I appreciate those data points from Fatima and Lars, and they certainly prove a tactical utility in overcoming inertia. They show how to get the engine running. But systems only overcome tactical inertia. They don't necessarily override profound emotional depletion. If the foundational purpose fades away, that consistency will start to feel like an empty, draining ritual, and the action will stop stretching past that 2-minute mark. You argue that the learner continues past 2 minutes because of momentum. I would argue that this extended action still requires an underlying belief in the activity's long-term value, and that belief is, inescapably derived from the initial foundational purpose. If we only prioritize the how, we risk creating this brittle, mechanistic existence that's just one bad week away from collapse. Look closer at the success story of Mei Lin. Her main problem was burnout and pressure, not a lack of a schedule. Her solution wasn't just adopting a new time block. It was making a radical shift to finding enjoyable engagement, a process-based purpose that removed external pressure and made the practice worthwhile. She fell in love with the process not because it was efficiently scheduled, but because it connected her intrinsically to things she genuinely enjoyed, like reading novels and joining book clubs. That enduring, intrinsic engagement, it was driven by the why, which then made the how easy to maintain.
Well, I'm not entirely convinced by that because I think you're miscategorizing the source of that sustainable energy. I agree that enjoyable engagement is important, but its stability comes from its structural components, process-based goals, because they are within our daily control, unlike the distant emotional outcome. And this is the critical shift in identity, from someone who wants to achieve fluency to someone who engages with English podcasts daily. That structural identity change is exactly what creates resilience against those motivational dips. When you are a person who does the thing, the system takes over. Time blocking is a perfect example of this. It eliminates the daily draining decision of if and when. The power of the unbroken chain of days itself becomes the motivation, just as Fatima found. The system becomes self-reinforcing. And furthermore, look at Diego, the university student. His internal motivation was all over the place. He succeeded by implementing a purely external structure, the accountability partner. That social commitment and external structure, a truly systemic intervention, it proved to be a stronger, more reliable anchor than his own internal mood. This is clear evidence of the system not just managing action, but generating its own reliable, low-grade motivation, exactly as the source material suggests.
I agree that process goals are efficient methods of execution, but if the original outcome goal, the compelling foundational why, is abandoned, then the efficient execution of the process goal loses all its meaning. Your interpretation seems to risk making the process the goal itself, which is a classic error of letting the tail wag the dog. I mean, why would Diego commit to checking in with an accountability partner every day if he no longer deeply cared about accessing the information needed for his career path? And I would challenge your classification of the accountability partner as a purely systemic intervention. Accountability is powerful precisely because it taps into a powerful emotional factor, social commitment and avoiding perceived failure.
It relies on the pre-existing emotional value you place on your partner's respect or your public promise. It requires the underlying why to give that external pressure any weight. And moreover, the material itself highlights the importance of the victory log. This tool provides concrete, small evidence of progress. But if the victory you record, say using a new idiom correctly, isn't ultimately tied to that initial, compelling, deeply felt reason for learning, the log loses its emotional power to fight the feeling of being stuck in that valley of disappointment. The system needs to be consistently plugged back into an intrinsic, purposeful energy source. And that is why the strategic reignition section specifically advises integrating English into a passion project, demonstrating that intrinsic purpose must be used to keep the system running.
I think you might be misunderstanding the purpose of the system. The system isn't designed for emotional uplift. It's designed for function. The goal, as the material states quite clearly, is not a perpetual state of excitement, but rather a system so robust that your progress continues automatically, even when you feel profoundly bored or tired. This structural approach prepares you for the inevitable crises and dips that will overwhelm pure willpower. We are directed to embrace the fade, to see the loss of novelty not as a failure of motivation, but as a signal that the easy part is over and the true enduring work, the forging of skill, has begun. And this enduring work is guided by the structural map of your habits. The map is what maintains speed and direction regardless of the emotional weather outside the vehicle. The system is the driver that guarantees action. The purpose is just the destination sign.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the system can sustain itself indefinitely without purpose. A robust system is excellent at handling a drop from, say, level 10 commitment down to level 3, which is where most failures happen. But what happens when external factors, a major family crisis, and intense career burnout, take that commitment to absolute zero? The structure, the map, the accountability partner, they all rely on the learner deciding to engage. And if that core desire is extinguished, the system provides no internal engine restart mechanism. The source material offers the definitive counter-evidence right in its own framework. The section on reigniting the spark is an explicit admission that systems are not sufficient. And what's the very first step in reigniting? It is always to reconnect with your why. This proves that when the habit furnace is completely cold, the only viable means of resuscitation is to recall that deep original purpose.
The why is the parachute that opens when the how inevitably fails to overcome existential exhaustion. The structural strength only matters if you're committed to remaining in the plane.
And that brings us to a crucial point of divergence. While I certainly recognize the necessity of the why for setting the initial direction, I maintain that consistency is ultimately forged by the quiet, steady process of daily discipline. The functional path to long-term success requires the learner to prioritize small, measurable action and habit engineering to generate motivation rather than waiting for an emotional prerequisite that we know will inevitably vanish. The structural integrity of the system is the only reliable guarantee for the long haul.
And while I agree that habits and structure are critical tools for the long game, they're the reliable map that guides our daily steps, those tools are inert without a deep, visible, and renewed sense of purpose to give them meaning, direction, and resilience in the face of true adversity. The journey demands both the map of habits and the compass of purpose, but it's the compass that defines the meaning of the direction we travel.
This discussion, I think, illuminates the critical dual nature of any long-term endeavor. Success requires understanding not only the essential mechanics of building a system, but also the necessity of cultivating the conviction that powers it. And it suggests there's always more to explore in the material when we consider how sustained human effort is truly achieved.